Welcome to the Lean and Agile Thinking for NGOs and Nonprofits interview with Dr. Jeffrey Leiker and Dr. Andrew Parris, Chapter 2. In this chapter, we explore common challenges in the NGO world and lean approaches to address these challenges. So Andrew, perhaps you take just a minute or two or three and tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences in the NGO world. Set the context for us, and then let's go forward with Jeff.
As you mentioned, I was part of the Lean, at the beginning, it was the Lean Aircraft Initiative, which was kind of the follow-on project to the International Motor Vehicle Program, out of which the book, The Machine That Changed the World, came. And so we were asking the question, does Lean apply outside of automobiles? Or does it apply to aircraft? Because we make a lot of automobiles, but very few aircraft. So high volume versus very, very low volume. And the number of parts and all the rest was quite different. And the answer at the time came back, yes, Lean also applies to aircraft. Aircraft are getting more expensive, they're getting poor quality, they're taking very long times. Can Lean address these issues? And yes, it can. And so my personal journey has been asking the question, does Lean apply in X? So after leaving MIT, I joined Lockheed Martin, worked there for 15 years, mostly on the Atlas rocket program as a process improvement facilitator. I got my Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt there. And then I read a book. The book was called Walking with the Poor. It was in the course that I took in economic development. It was written by a former leader of World Vision. Brian Myers was his name. And as I read about World Vision's approach to walking with the poor out of poverty, is what that means, I learned about the role of a development facilitator. And this is someone who comes into the community, but doesn't tell the community what to do. World Vision doesn't want to do things for the community. They ask the community, where do you want to be? What do you want your life to be like? What are the challenges that are facing you? They do kind of the root cause analysis with the community, because the development facilitator coming in from the outside is not the expert in being poor, but the people who are poor are the experts in being poor. And this idea of leaving the ownership with the people whom you're helping, of not telling them what to do, of not doing things for them, but relying on their expertise and their ideas. I thought, gosh, that sounds awfully familiar. I think that's what I'm doing inside the organization. Because as a process improvement facilitator, what was I doing? I was facilitating, I was training people, I was facilitating improvement projects where we would ask, where do you want to be? Where are you now? What are the problems we do? So I'm the expert in improvement, in process improvement. I would facilitate using the various tools, concept of Lean Six Sigma. The same thing that a development facilitator was doing in the community, facilitating the community, but allowing them to be the experts in what are their problems and what do they think would work, and how do we walk together out of poverty. And so that got me interested in World Vision. I said, hey, I want to join World Vision. And I was able to do that a year later. That's another story. But basically, I worked for 9 years in World Vision. 3 of those, I lived in East Africa with my family and led process improvement, Lean Six Sigma, continuous improvement, whatever you want to call it, initiative in the East Africa region with about 9 different countries and the regional office. After that, I came to work for Medair, and I'm also teaching and promoting Lean. So World Vision, for those of you who don't know, it's one of the largest international NGOs. It does both development work, which is helping people who are poor and out of poverty. It does also humanitarian work, which is more helping people who are in a time of crisis. So whether it's natural disaster or human-created conflicts, people who are refugees, people who are homeless, people who are suffering from whatever crisis it is they're going through. So Medair is it's based in Switzerland. That's where I'm living now. This is a recent photo my son took of the mountains in Switzerland. Medair is it's a faith-based NGO. We work in about a dozen countries. We do different sectors: health and nutrition, WASH, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene, shelter and infrastructure. We've been around for 30 years, and we specialize in the hardest to reach places. So we go where maybe other NGOs don't go, where it's difficult. Access is difficult. So we're in countries like Somalia, South Sudan, um, DR Congo in the Middle East. We're in Syria. We're, of course, in Ukraine also, uh, since pretty much day one or two or three of the crisis there. But that's been yeah, I've committed myself to promoting and teaching lean. It used to be Lean Six Sigma. Now I've really come to focus just on the lean side of things, because my experience is that's where the greatest benefit is, and given the level of maturity that we're at, that's where we really get the biggest bang for the buck. So I have some courses I teach, and I have a one-day energizer, a one-week lean green belt, where I really teach the things that Jeff has written about in his books, and others have developed. These are things that I'm trying to teach in a hands-on way to empower the people in World Vision and now Medair to apply these things in their work. Just a little bit about the context before I jump into a couple of questions for Jeff. When we think about the difference in context between what a Toyota or another company might face and what an NGO faces, where we work, there's crisis and or poverty. The needs are always greater than the resources, which means that, people who are doing the work always have much more that they could do or could be doing than they're able to do, which is certainly a source of frustration and challenge. Corruption is typically quite high. Things are unpredictable. There's often chaos, especially after a disaster or during times of conflict. There's poor infrastructure. Often we're limited in the places that we can access, sometimes because of government, sometimes because of military conflict. Education levels are not obviously as high as in the West. And there are also environmental challenges that we face. The people who work for an NGO, they're people who want to help. They've chosen to work for the NGO because they typically they believe in the cause. They are committed to helping the people who are in crisis, who are in poverty. Again, as I mentioned, we're unable to help everyone, so it is a source of frustration that we can't do as much as we want to do. Often we're stressed, we're overworked, we have to reduce our overhead, so we may not have as many resources to do the things we need to do and keep our costs down. There's often high turnover given the stressful situations that we work on. At the same time, the people who are doing work are really quite sacrificial of their own safety and well-being. Sometimes they're brave, given some of the places that we end up going. They're determined, committed to to helping people. They're often professionals, not everyone, but many people are professionals, and they do the work out of a sense of compassion and care. One last thing about the interesting thing when we talk about customers and customer value, we in fact have two customers. On the one hand, there's the people who are in crisis, whom we're serving. That is really our primary customer. And at the same time, the party that gives us the money, the donors, often institutional donors who are governments, they come with a large quantity of requirements, and it makes some of the changes challenging in the work that we do. So with that, a bit of an introduction, I wanted to think through together with Jeff about some of the obstacles or some of the challenges that we in the NGO sector face, and think about how Jeff, with your experience how you would help us think through these. You've worked obviously with, you've written many books, you've studied, you've consulted with many companies all over the world in different industries, not just manufacturing, but also service, and including healthcare. So while you don't have experience in NGOs, I think your experience, which is so deep, can help us. So the first question, I'm sure you hear this in other sectors, but we're not a manufacturing company. We don't make cars. We don't mass produce things. We don't have short cycle times. Often the time span of the things that are happening are quite slow. How would you respond to assure people that, in fact, this lean thing does also apply in the NGO sector, given some of the challenges that we've talked about?
Well, these days, I'm mostly speaking and writing, but for a big part of my career, for over 30 years, I had a consulting company and we were doing. And one of the things I learned from Toyota, and you mentioned training, hands-on training, and you mentioned in World Vision that they're focused on the customer, and they weren't trying to serve the customer, they were trying to develop the customer so that they could fish for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's very much the Toyota way. Both when they deal with an outside organization, they do have people who go into outside organizations, including NGOs, and teach them the Toyota production system and lean. But they also have to teach it internally. For example, when they set up a new factory, say in Indonesia or in Mississippi or in Mexico, they have to teach the people the Toyota production system. And they do it through what they call on-the-job development, which is learning by doing. So they put them in situations where they can try something, and then they teach them the basic concepts of how to observe the process and how to improve it, and then they ask them to do it. I'm not talking about over weeks, I'm talking about over hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so within hours, you're actually coming up with ideas for improvement and trying those ideas out and seeing the benefit. So one thing I learned from Toyota is the value of learning by doing, which is different from learning by listening or learning by reading. So when you're learning by listening or reading, you're hearing intellectual arguments. And then we have very active brains that are really good at coming up with counter arguments as fast as we hear an argument if we don't agree, if somehow it seems disruptive to whatever we believe or whatever we're currently doing or what our current habits are. So if our vision, for example, of lean is that it's mean and it's about slashing employees and it's something you do in the factory under sweatshop conditions, but that doesn't apply to what we're doing, working with poor people that don't have a lot of resources or education and trying to help people, then when I explain to you what lean is and what it can do for you, there's a good chance a lot of flags are going to come up in your brain. And you're going to be, even if you don't say it out loud, you're going to be debating with me. And guess what? In your brain, you're always going to win.
Yeah.
So what I discovered was that trying to convince something of something that they don't already believe in or doesn't already make sense to them is really difficult, challenging, frustrating, and I didn't want to do it. So when we worked with companies, like I remember I gave a presentation to small businesses in Ohio, and they all said, we're too small, we don't have the resources, we're not Toyota, our volumes are lower. So they all had some sort of reason why they couldn't do this, even though it made sense intellectually. So I said, if somebody wants to contact me, if you want my people to come in and do a demonstration workshop, a 1-week Kaizen workshop, we'd be willing to do that for just our travel costs. And one company took us up on it, and we did it, and they were able to experience what we meant without explanation. And we just were doing it.
Yep.
So all the things that they thought they couldn't do, within the first day they were doing. and then
Yeah.
we didn't have to argue with them. So I always prefer to convince through demonstration. I mentioned Toyota works with outside companies. When they teach TPS, they're not too crazy about giving lectures or trying to develop persuasive arguments. What they say is, let's go to the Gemba. The Gemba is wherever it is happening, where we're delivering food to the poor, where you're delivering medicine to people who need medicine, where you're setting up a clinic, where you're building a house for somebody whose house was destroyed in a hurricane. Let's go to the Gemba and let's learn by doing. And then what I'm going to do is feed you just enough information so you can get started. And then as you're doing, I will coach you rather than tell you. But I'm going to give you the minimum information so that you can start to think for yourself. So anyway, as far as debates go, as an example, so let's say that the ideal is we go into your place and we do a project. And then you experience it, and that's the best. And the worst is if I just simply start arguing with you. And in between, if you can go and see something, it's better than my arguing with you. So if you, for example, one way you can go and see is that Toyota has an organization called TSSC, the Toyota Production System Support Center, and they work with NGOs. And they have some great professionally done videos that show the before and after of how they, for example, would take an organization that was set up very quickly to deliver vaccines when COVID first hit, and went from doing 50 to 100 patients a day to doing thousands in a day with the same staff. And there's just many examples like that. They worked with an organization that was building housing for people who lost their houses in Hurricane Katrina. And at first doubled, then tripled the speed with which they could build houses with the same number of people. So that helps to actually see it. And like I said, the videotapes are good. It's even better to go visit and see for yourself. Not because you're going to copy what you see, but because at least it can inspire you and address the kind of the first barrier, which is, does this work at all outside a Toyota factory? Well, I see it's working. And it's working in a big football field where they're delivering vaccines. And that's not a Toyota factory.
We watched the meals per hour, Toyota meals per hour video of the food bank in New York that they helped, and it's always a compelling, very well made and compelling video when I do my Energizer training.
And that certainly helps. And then I'm sure in your training you have activities that they do.
Yeah,
like
we sure do.
Simulations, and that helps too to get the So whatever people learn by doing is they're going to remember, and it's going to be much more meaningful to them, and they're not going to fight with themselves. So what I find is, if you do these hands-on exercises correctly, the answer to the question is coming from the group you're trying to train.
Yeah, that's right.